Hey guys, tonight we drift to the roots of a tree so vast that every breath you take seems to stir a leaf somewhere far above, and every quiet heartbeat echoes through wood older than thunder. You crouch at the base of the world ash, the bark cool against your palms, grain lines like river maps, sap humming like a far-off choir. Fog curls around your ankles, the soil smells like rain on iron, and, tiny reality check, you probably won't survive this if you actually try digging under a mythical tree whose roots bind reality. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing our sleepy map of the world light up. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lower your weight, feel the ground give softly, breathing like bellows beneath the tree. The roots fork and braid, thick as ship masts, thin as violin strings, each strand carrying a rumor from a realm you haven't seen yet. The first rumor is cold, a sigh from frost-silver rivers somewhere to the north. Another is warm, a laugh like sparks, flaring and fading. For now you stay with the roots, feeling how they hold it all together like a patient librarian keeping loud patrons from toppling the shelves. You listen, and the wood listens back. Your fingertips trail a ridge, splinters rising like little mountain ranges. The name hums through the grain, Yggdrasil. Some say it means Odin's steed, because gallows were called a horse, and the god once hung himself on this very tree to seek wisdom. Cheery, I know, perfect bedtime material. You glance up at the trunk and decide the fan could be a little louder. Still, the root holds no grudges. It murmurs regardless of what gods once asked of it. Historians still argue whether the 9 realms were intended as precise cosmic addresses or a flexible poetic map that shifts depending on the story, and the bark seems content to let in debate. A beetle trundles past your knuckle, armored and intent, like it applied for a job in dwarf engineering and got sent to landscaping instead. You watch it vanish between bark scales and think about how even tiny lives make highways here. Above you, something whispers, maybe wind, maybe an old bird preening. Below you, something drinks, slow, deliberate, like the ground itself pauses between sips. The tree's patience becomes your pace. You match it without trying. You slide along a route as wide as a hill road. Veins of pale scratches show where deer rubbed antlers long ago. Dark grooves mark places where someone, sometime, carved ruins. You trace a letter that could mean gift or could mean promise, and both feel correct. A mainstream fact to anchor you. Much of what we know about these stories comes from Icelandic texts, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, written in the 13th century when poets tried to catch older oral tales before they melted into the snowdrifts of forgetting. You mow the thank you to those scribes and feel the wood warm beneath your palm. The air tastes of resin and cold mint. A hair-fine mist rises where the roots dive so deep the soil forgets sunlight. You tuck into a hollow, and the surface sounds fade into padded hush. It's cozy in that way only slightly haunted tree cavities can be cozy. A soft drip begins somewhere, slow as a bored drummer during sound check. You consider the snack situation in mythical cosmology. Probably mead, bread, and bark? Let's not do bark. You settle for imaginary mead with a foam mustache nobody will ever see. Light joke 1, the moss remains stoic, but you sense approval. Your cheek rests against the inner curve of wood, and faint tremors find you, like distant footsteps. The tremors become patterns, and patterns become stories, a hammer's heft, a neck scrape, the hush of a goddess's necklace sliding into a box lined with moss. Your breaths match the rhythm until your body is more root than visitor, more listening than thinking. Somewhere, far above, a leaf turns to look at the stars. Somewhere far below, a spring shivers awake, remembering names. A modern aside tiptoes in. You wonder how many gigabytes it would take to back up a tree that holds 9 universes, and whether the progress bar would keep freezing at Jotunheim assets. Light joke 2, you pat the bark like you're apologizing for the thought. The tree forgives you and keeps cradling the sky, unconcerned with your storage issues. A pale thread winds through the darkness, a root hair, delicate as breath on glass, yet it pierces stone. You follow it, nose close to the ground, and the scent shifts. Mushroom, wet leather, a hint of salt that should not be here, unless one of the roots drinks a brackish memory. Tuck away a quirky tidbit for later. In parts of medieval Scandinavia, runestones sometimes doubled as property markers, so a family's driveway could also be a timeline. You picture a farmer saying, "Park by great-grandpa," second rune on the left, and you hide a smile the beetles can't judge. You pause where 3 great roots plait together, then vanish in separate directions, like braids framing a face. Your fingers hover over the middle groove and feel the tiniest downdraft, as if air itself follows the wood's grain towards some deep water place. The tree thrums once, low, a bass note under a lullaby, and every insect in the hollow holds its breath. You hold yours too. When you let it go, the exhale slips into a tunnel you didn't see before, a corridor made by patient centuries of growth. You shuffle forward on elbows, a polite field mouse in a human-sized body, careful not to snag your sleeve on old resin pearls. The tunnel opens into a chamber smelling like secrets. Your eyes adjust to a glow with no visible source, as if moonlight was remembered by the wood itself. The floor is a lattice of living fibers, springy and warm. You press your palm flat and feel a pulse answer. Not yours, not any god's, just the tree's daily "everything okay" status check. "Everything is okay," you whisper, and the bark listens with professional detachment. You have the sudden conviction that if you told a joke here, it would be graded by moss. You risk safe material. I tried to leaf earlier, but I couldn't branch out. Somewhere a beetle audibly groans. Light joke 3. The moss does not give you a high five, but you sense it's thinking about it. You think about the way knowledge travels, not in straight lines but in capillaries and detours. Historians still argue whether Yggdrasil must be an ash at all. Some poems suggest features of yew or other northern trees, and scholars debate if the term named one species or a mythic archetype that borrowed traits is needed. The tree doesn't mind being many things, it only minds neglect. A draft slides over your wrist, cooler than the rest, carrying voices that are not voices, distant water, a stone turning in its sleep, the echo of a word that might be, well. Your ear meets the floor, and you hear 3 notes, separated by long pauses, a crisp one, like snow snapping underfoot, a deep one, like a cave drinking rain, and a bright one, like a coin dropped into a fountain you're not supposed to touch. Without knowing how, you know you're close to the places where the roots drink names into themselves. Before you move, you flatten your hands on the wood and thank the root for the lift, as if it were a taxi with a very relaxed schedule. The humming turns the darkness into velvet. You crawl toward the draft, slow and deliberate, because patience is how you make friends with ancient things. There will be wells waiting, and a squirrel with opinions, and an eagle with altitude. But for now you stay inside the breath of the roots, letting them teach you the first lesson. Everything is connected, not by force, but by listening. You close your eyes, not to sleep, just to tune. Count 3 breaths. With each, the earth rises and falls like a sleeping animal, and you match it, ribcage to ribcage. Somewhere in Iceland, centuries ago, a scribe dipped a pen and tried to catch this feeling on calfskin, turning breath into lines you could carry across time. The ink dried, the snow fell, and here you are, fingertips dirty, nose tickled by resin, unlost, and exactly where you're supposed to be, at the beginning, under the roots that hold the worlds in place.
You ease along the braided passage until the floor under your palms grows cooler, smoother, like polished bone under a velvet cloth. The draft you followed widens into a hush, so complete it feels like a bowl turned over the world. The root bows, and you bow with it, peering into a shallow chamber where 3 corridors open like patient mouths. Water breathes from each. 3 different tempers, 3 different songs. You recognize them without having been taught, the way you know salt by scent or thunder by mood. These are the wells, the places where the tree drinks past, present, and that stubbornly opinionated future. You take the left passage first, because it smells like warm stone after sun, even here in the dark. The air grows faintly sweet as if flowers are remembering themselves. A circle of pale light gathers ahead, rimmed by white roots like fingers curved protectively. You kneel beside water so clear your reflection looks startled to meet you. It is Urdarbrunn, the well of Urdur, where the 3 Norns tend time like gardeners who know which weeds are actually herbs. You can almost taste linen and ink here, sticky resin runes and cool thread drawn between fingers. Mainstream fact for your anchor. In the Eddas, Urdur, past, Verdandi, becoming, and Skuld, debt or what must be, sit at this well by Yggdrasil and shape fate, sprinkling the tree with water and white clay so it stays fresh and unsplintered. You picture them with watering cans and tiny "Do not disturb fate" signs, and the image refuses to leave. You lean closer, and the water glows with skim milk brightness. Tiny ripples knit themselves into patterns, loops, hooks, ladders, like lace being finished at an invisible lap. The Norns are not visible to you, but you feel their attention the way you feel a cat's gaze from the top of a bookshelf. A thread grazes the water and hums. Somewhere a life tenses, then relaxes. Historians still argue whether the Norns were imagined as singular gods of fate, as a class of beings like Valkyries, or as a poetic way to describe how time behaves when woven, and you decide the ambiguity is part of their charm. Clarity is for daylight. This is a night lesson. You watch the surface a moment longer. Your own reflection stares back at you with a slightly accusatory angle, like, "So, about those sleep habits." You lower your voice and ask the water for something light, gentle, and durable. Maybe patience with side quests. A ring of ripples travels outward, then back. The answer is yes, or at least check again after the next nap. Light joke 1, the well does not object. Before you go, you notice a pale crust along the rim where the Norns' clay dried. Your fingertip touches it and finds it cooler than expected, like moonlight made tangible. A quirky tidbit drifts up, as if the well had a filing cabinet. In some Nordic folk practices much later than the Eddas, people left pins or coins at springs for luck or answers, and a few springs were nicknamed for beings like elves or the hidden folk. You picture a farmer squinting at a well on market day. 1 coin for good weather, 2 if the cow stops judging me. You and the moss share a silent giggle. Yes, the moss absolutely judged the coin too. You return to the chamber and take the middle passage, which tastes like iron and old oaths. The corridor narrows. You turn sideways, run your palm along the wood wall for balance, and find the wood humming a steady, thoughtful note. When it opens again, the light is duskier, blue-gray, like memory under a deep shelf. A stone well sits snugly under a heavy root, and something like a raven feather is caught in a crack. You kneel and understand the gravity of this place even before you name it. Mimir's Well. Mimir's Well of Wisdom, the deep draught that costs more than most of us can imagine surrendering. You cup your hand but stop short of scooping. A low resonance nudges you in the sternum. This is not a tasting bar where you swirl, spit, and give notes like hints of oak and existential dread. You sit back on your heels. The well is quiet, but the quiet has personality. It is the library where shoes squeak too loudly. It is your smartest friend who waits out your jokes, then gives you a look that makes you reread everything. Historians still argue whether Mimir was primarily a god of wisdom, a Jotun keeper of knowledge, or a decapitated head imbued with uncanny counsel. Yes, Norse myth really went there, and whether Odin's sacrifice of an eye here was a late addition or a core feature. You rub the bridge of your nose like your own ocular budget is suddenly tight. You don't ask for wisdom, you ask for better questions. The water does not ripple, which you take as approval. Light joke 2 cues itself. You imagine the subscription tiers, free trial, one eye for premium, soul search bundle coming this winter, and immediately apologize to the well for the humor. The silence forgives you because it has other things to do, like be the groundwater of every hard choice ever made. Your anchor fact returns to steady you. The story of Odin trading an eye for a sip is preserved in the Prose Edda, and his relentless seeking, 9 nights on the tree, runes won in pain, a tongue that never stops asking, threads through the surviving poems. You compare that to your own determination when the Wi-Fi drops at 2 a.m. and decide Odin and you would at least agree about perseverance and strong tea. The well seems to raise one eyebrow. You cannot see an eyebrow. Still, you behave. Back to the junction, last corridor on the right. This one is colder, the draft slick with a metallic edge that thinks about snow. You wrap your arms around yourself because your body likes theater. The darkness here isn't hostile, it just minds its own business with incredible focus. The well you find is less a neat circle and more a rocky mouth chiseled by persistence. The sound here is a very slow audience clap. You think, Hvergelmir, the roaring boiler in Niflheim, source or gathering place of countless rivers with names that sound like stones skipping, Jull, Slid, Laped. Mainstream fact. In the lore, Hvergelmir is named as the headwater from which many rivers flow, and a dragon, Nidrog, gnaws at the roots nearby. You glance at the wood overhead and offer it a reassuring pat like you're complimenting a very stoic employee. Mist rises off the surface like breath on a mirror. Somewhere in the dark, you hear the old scrape of scales on stone, unhurried like a janitor with eternity on the shift. Historians still argue whether Hvergelmir was the same as the primeval Elevarger revers from the creation stories, or a later separate pool of origins anchoring the underworld's cold geometry. The tree creaks in a tone that might mean both sometimes, because trees are better at holding multiple truths than people scrolling under a blanket. You crouch and hold your palm above the water. It tingles, then numbs. You think of all water beginning somewhere, then beginning again, and you feel kindly toward your kettle at home for its small, earnest service. Quirky tidbit bubbles up. In medieval Iceland, people sometimes used hot springs to bake bread by burying dough in warm ground. You imagine someone calling it geothermal sourdough and charging extra. Light joke 3 checks in on time. Even Niflheim allows a smile that fogs the air. The root above you shudders, not with fear, but with a cat's stretch as it drinks. You notice faint peck marks along the wood and remember your earlier suspicion of a big bird somewhere up the trunk. The water of Hvergelmir tastes of beginnings and ends, of promises that take their time. It is not a place to ask for comfort. It is a place to loosen your grip and let the current make room. You follow one thread of sound and it becomes a river name that tastes like copper on your tongue. Another thread carries frost that never melts, a quiet that doesn't need approval. You step back and your breath ghosts white. When you retrace your path to the central chamber, you feel different. Not in any dramatic way. A montage has not played, you have not leveled up, but your pace has slowed to the tree's default pace. Ordar Brunn washed your edges. Mimer's Brunn sharpened your questions. Hervelgemer whispered, "Start over," as often as needed. You realize that the three wells are not simply locations, they are postures. Water is a verb here. You rest your palm on the root lattice and feel it answer with that familiar, "Everything okay?" hum. Everything is okay, you tell it, even when the rivers run cold and the silence looks like judgment. The moss remembers your earlier pun and decides to forgive you. The beetle from the last section ambles by, with a crumb of something impossible, as if it took a detour through a dwarf kitchen. You take that as a sign to keep going, to follow the route that slopes upward to where the air smells like wind and old feathers. Above, the crown of the tree brightens as if a cloud moved, though you are still underground. Something waits at the top, a watcher in the high branches, a vault with a heartbeat. You brush bark dust from your knees and set out, taking the cadence of water with you.
You squeeze through the seam of light, and the air changes first, thinner, brisker, as though it's been skimming the upper branches for 100 leagues before drifting down to you. The root beneath your feet curves upward, broadening into a walkway as steady as a mountain ledge. Every step releases a faint perfume of sap and sun-warmed wood, the way an old porch exhales in late afternoon. The glow ahead resolves into leaves so pale they almost look silver, fluttering in a rhythm that is not quite wind and not quite heartbeat. Then you hear it, the faint rustle of feathers shifting above, deliberate and vast. You tip your chin back, and there, far above on the highest bough, a shape stirs against the pale sky. It's not a cloud. Clouds do not preen themselves or peer down with eyes like polished amber. This is the eagle, nameless in most tellings, but never absent in the lore. A sentinel whose view stretches across all 9 realms, the original aerial surveillance without the subscription fee. You keep walking, the trunk rising like a skyscraper carved from a single living thing. Your pace slows not from fatigue, but from awe. The proportions make you feel as though you've stumbled into the blueprint of the cosmos. Mainstream fact, the eagle on Yggdrasil is mentioned in the Poetic Edda's Grimnismal, described as knowing many things and often accompanied, though accompanied might be too cheerful a word, by the squirrel Ratatoskr, who runs messages between it and the dragon Nidhogr, gnawing at the roots far below. Historians still argue whether this eagle represents wisdom, watchfulness, or simply the narrative need for a bird with a better vantage point than any god. You pause at a notch in the trunk where a branch, thick as a castle tower, juts into open air. Leaning out, you can see between the leaves, fjords stitched in silver far below, clouds in slow herds, a smear of aurora teasing the horizon. The eagle shifts again, and a flake of down drifts loose, spiraling toward you. You catch it in both hands, its texture softer than anything that size has any right to be. There's a faint vibration in the feather, like the afterhum of a plucked harp string. You realize with a quiet thrill that you're holding a fragment of everything the eagle has seen. Feasts in Asgard, storms clawing at Midgard's coasts, the red flicker of Muspelheim against the black. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. In certain medieval Norse charms, feathers, often from more mundane birds, were stitched into clothing or bedding as protective talismans, sometimes dyed or carved with symbols. The idea that a bird's sight might guard you isn't new, and you think about tucking this feather behind your ear for purely non-magical reasons, of course. A shadow crosses your vision, and you look up. Two golden eyes meet yours, unblinking. The eagle does not call, does not even ruffle its feathers. It simply watches. You wonder if this is how it addresses guests. No fuss, just an appraisal that lasts precisely as long as needed. Light joke 1 rises uninvited. You imagine the eagle as a cosmic bouncer deciding whether you're on the list. You wave faintly. It doesn't wave back. Birds have boundaries. You lean against the branch and listen. There's wind here, yes, but also something deeper. A layered whisper like countless scrolls being turned at once. The sound seems to come from everywhere. The leaves, the eagle's chest, even the bark beneath your hand. Historians still argue whether the eagle and the unnamed hawk said to sit between its eyes are two beings, one being with multiple aspects, or simply storytelling flourishes layered over centuries. You squint, half hoping to see the hawk. If it's there, it's very good at pretending to be sky. The eagle's head tilts slightly, and you feel a small pressure in your mind, as though it's handing you a parcel wrapped in air. Inside is a glimpse, not of danger, not even of the future, but of scale. You see the 9 realms not as a diagram in a book, but as moving, breathing neighbors, bound by the wood and sap of this tree. You see that your place in it is no smaller than a leaf and no larger than a thought. The feather in your hands warms just enough to notice. Light joke 2 arrives on cue. You consider asking the eagle for turn-by-turn directions to the next realm, but suspect it would just point vaguely with a wing and let you figure it out. You tuck the feather into your belt instead, a small nod to preparedness. The eagle blinks once, a gesture you decide to interpret as mutual respect. You turn to continue upward along the branch, the sunlight filtering into green-gold pools at your feet. Far below, you hear something faint and chittering, probably Ratatoskr, the messenger squirrel, beginning another climb. You make a mental note to be ready for whatever verbal acrobatics come next. If half the tales are true, that squirrel can turn a single insult into a full-scale grudge match. The branch you're on begins to narrow, but the tree's architecture is forgiving. Natural steps form in the wood, spiraling higher, each one fringed with moss that seems to approve of your gentle tread. A gust of wind tugs at your sleeve, and you smell rain from some realm where it hasn't yet fallen. The eagle watches still, but you sense its interest shifting back to the horizon, as if your presence has been acknowledged and filed under harmless wanderer. You pause one last time to look over the drop. From here, the canopy stretches like an ocean, every leaf a small world. Somewhere beyond your sight, the other realms shimmer in their own light, linked by roots you've already walked and branches you've yet to touch. The feather at your belt stirs in the breeze, and you realize you'll carry this moment, this vantage, down through every realm to come. Light joke 3 drifts in lazily. You wonder if you can list personal audience with World Tree Eagle on a resume, maybe under relevant life skills. The moss near your boot seems to approve, though moss approval is famously understated. With the eagle's gaze no longer pinning you, you step carefully toward the inner trunk again. The wood here is warm under your palm, sun-soaked and steady. You can feel, faintly, the pulse of the other realms through it. Midgard's tide, Jotunheim's frost, Vanaheim's slow river bends. The path ahead slopes gently downward, curving toward a livelier, more erratic rustling somewhere below. If the eagle is the tree's crown of quiet authority, then what waits next is surely its loudest courier. You begin your descent, one hand brushing the bark, the other resting lightly on the feather. Somewhere in the branches ahead, Ratatoskr's tiny claws scurry, carrying words that may or may not be worth the trip. You follow, because in this tree, even gossip matters.
The rustling grows sharper, more staccato, like someone shaking a paper bag full of acorns. You round a curve in the trunk, and there he is, Ratatoskr, the squirrel, halfway down a branch no wider than your forearm, tail flicking like he's directing traffic only he can see. His fur is a neat chestnut, but the eyes, oh, the eyes, are glittering with the smug energy of someone who has just delivered a cutting remark and is already composing the follow-up. You pause because you don't want to spook him, but you realize quickly he isn't the type to be startled. He's the type to lean into startlement, to use it as a segue into another anecdote. Mainstream fact: Ratatoskr's main job, according to the poetic Edda's Grimnismal, is to ferry insults between the eagle perched at Yggdrasil's top and Nidhugr, the dragon gnawing at its roots. It's a career path that combines long-distance running, diplomacy, and a very selective definition of truth. Historians still argue whether he was originally meant as comic relief in the mythos or a symbolic warning about how petty conflicts can undermine even cosmic structures. He spots you instantly. You look like someone who appreciates the finer points of an insult, his expression says. You tilt your head and smile, because in a tree like this, non-verbal communication saves breath. He darts closer, claws scritching on bark, and you catch snippets of his chatter, not words exactly, but the rhythm of a gossip columnist dictating into a deadline. Light joke one lands. You imagine Ratatoskr with a tiny press badge, realm times, deadline every sunrise. He circles you once, then stops abruptly, nose twitching. You can tell he's calculating how much of what he carries you should hear. A quirky tidbit bubbles into your mind. In some later Scandinavian folklore, squirrels were seen as weather omens, their frantic activities sometimes interpreted as signs of coming storms. Here, though, Ratatoskr seems to generate his own weather, a microclimate of energy in the otherwise measured air of the tree. You lean back against the trunk, letting him choose the pace. He begins to pace in that zigzag way squirrels do, tail snapping each time he pauses for emphasis. You realize he's giving you the short version of his usual gossip route. Eagle says dragon's scales are dull. Dragon says eagle's feathers are shedding. Eagle says at least feathers grow back. Dragon says at least I don't preen in public. And so on, endlessly, each loop more barbed than the last. The tree groans faintly beneath you, and you sense its patience is long, but not infinite. Historians still argue whether Ratatoskr was invented purely to explain the occasional creak or sway in the world tree, a narrative device for stress distribution, or if he was a mythic echo of real animals observed scampering in tall pines. Either way, you can't help admiring his stamina. Ratatoskr pauses mid-sentence, or mid-scurrying really, and tilts his head at you. The gaze says, "Would you like to send a message?" Light joke 2 tumbles out. You imagine yourself dictating something profound like, "Tell the eagle he has a leaf in his beak," just to see how it mutates by the time it reaches the crown. The squirrel would probably embellish it into a diplomatic incident. Instead, you offer him a crumb from an imaginary pocket. He sniffs it, pretends to be unimpressed, then takes it anyway because dignity is negotiable when snacks are involved. He darts to the far side of the branch, makes a dramatic pause as if to announce your generosity to the entire trunk, then vanishes briefly into the leaves. You wait, curious if he'll return. Sure enough, moments later, he's back, moving faster, possibly buoyed by sugar. He scurries up a vertical strip of bark and leans far enough to glimpse the roots below, tail quivering. You know exactly what he's doing, checking if Nidhugr is in earshot for the next delivery. You wonder how many insults the dragon has heard today, and whether any of them were recycled from last week. A gust sweeps through, carrying the mingled scents of pine resin, warm leaves, and something faintly metallic, the breath of the dragon far below. Ratatoskr freezes for a heartbeat, then bolts upward, claws scritching so fast you almost lose track of him. You catch a final look at his tail vanishing toward the eagle's domain, and you swear you hear a snicker in the wind. Quirky tidbit 2 comes to mind. In some modern interpretations, Ratatoskr is imagined as deliberately exaggerating messages to keep the eagle and dragon at odds, as if cosmic balance depends on a low-grade, perpetual feud. It's strangely comforting, the thought that the end of the world might be delayed by carefully curated gossip. Light joke 3 drifts in with the breeze. Maybe Ratatoskr is just trying to justify a gym membership by logging all those vertical miles. The moss clinging to the branch seems to shrug. Moss doesn't do cardio. The branch begins to slope gently downward, guiding you away from the squirrel's high-speed thoroughfare and toward a calmer stretch of trunk. You follow, the chatter fading into the leaf rustle above. Without realizing it, you start matching your steps to the rhythm of the tree again, leaving behind the swirl of petty words, but carrying the reminder that even in a cosmos-wide structure, some beings thrive on keeping the conversation going, whether it's productive or not. The air grows warmer as you descend, the light thickening into a honeyed gold. Somewhere ahead lies a realm of polished stone and shimmering walls, the place where the gods themselves hold court. You smooth your sleeve, not because they'll care about wrinkles, but because entering Asgard feels like the right moment to straighten up, at least a little. You place one palm on the warm bark and take a slow breath. Ratatoskr's energy buzzes faintly in your bones, like leftover static after a phone call. Below, a faint hum rises, the sound of crafted beauty, and the kind of laughter that assumes it will be echoed. You step forward, leaving the squirrel to his high-branch theater, and head toward the light spilling through a great open arch of leaves. You follow the warm spill of light through the leaf arch and step onto a path that feels deliberately welcoming, springy as if it has been swept by breezes with excellent manners. The bark beneath your soles flattens into inlaid grain, faint patterns like braided cords running side by side. Your hand brushes the trunk once, and the tree answers with a contented hum, the kind you get from a house that knows you're taking your shoes off at the door. Ahead, a shimmer thickens, not blinding, more like sunshine poured through honey. You realize you've reached the neighborhood with the best views. Asgard, realm of the Aesir, the gods who like their halls tall, their oaths loud, and their mead politely bottomless. A terrace opens, formed from a natural plank of the world tree, and beyond it rise roofs that seem hammered from daylight. Beams gleam as though burnished by centuries of festival sleeves. Halls stretch long, doors wide enough for a procession of moods. Somewhere a choir of blacksmith sounds, hammers ringing far away but timed like heartbeat. And beyond that, the murmur of conversation that knows it will be written down. You feel the feather from the eagle shift against your belt, its soft tickle reminding you you've earned at least a little swagger at this altitude. At the terrace edge, a bridge arcs from the trunk toward a district suspended in radiance. It's not stone, not wood, more a band of color you can hear. Each hue whispers its own timbre, red with a low purr, green with a playful lilt, blue with a note you only catch when you stop trying. You know this without being told. Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, threads Asgard to the other realms, a promise in spectral form. Mainstream fact, Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century prose Edda calls this bridge Billrust or Bifrost, saying it burns and that the gods write it daily, though it will break at Ragnarök. Historians still argue whether this mythic bridge was imagined as the rainbow, the Milky Way arcing the night, or a ritualized path across sacred land that story elevated to the sky. You test the bridge with a cautious toe. It holds, humming like a held note. As you walk, the colors adjust underfoot, soft as moss and somehow dry even where the blue pools deepest. A trio of ravens ride a thermal to your left, silhouettes flicking in and out of gold. You think of Odin's companions, though you suspect these are local interns doing laps. Light joke 1 floats up. You debate whether the bridge has a toll, then remember you've paid with cardio on the route Stairmaster. Approved. On the far side, the light settles into architecture. A hall lifts from the terrace with a roof like a long ship turned upside down, shingles overlapping like bronze scales. The door stands open, and you step into a cool that smells faintly of roasted grain, pine smoke, and polished antlers. Benches run along the walls, their surfaces etched with interlacing bands and tiny ships whose sails billow even when you swear there's no draft. At the far end, a table holds a scatter of game pieces carved from bone, a hunt paused, or a negotiation taking a breath. Your heart slows in time with the hall's calm. Laughter lives here, but it paces itself. You drift to a set of wall hangings where woven scenes ripple as if the threads remember wind. On one, riders cross Bifrost in a neat file, gods on horses whose hooves don't quite touch the ground. On another, a drinking horn as long as a story gets passed from hand to hand, the mead inside fizzing with the soft sound of bees remembering flowers. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found tiny gold foil figures called gugubber beneath the posts of real Iron Age and Viking halls. Little stamped couples or solitary figures, maybe offerings for luck or a housewarming gift from the spirit world. You picture a craftsman slipping one under a beam and whispering, "May your roof hear only good thunder." A breeze brushes your cheek and a second hall reveals itself beyond the first. Larger, brighter, hung with shields whose bosses gleam like small suns. You don't need anyone to label it Valhalla, the hall for chosen slain. You don't push the door, not because you fear it, but because the quiet says it's busy with its own kind of preparation. Historians still argue whether Valhalla represented a warrior elite's dream, a literary symbol of honor culture, or one destination among many in a complex afterlife map that changed with region and era. Either way, the doorway's shadow feels respectful in your bones. You incline your head and move on. Outside again, you follow a colonnade where columns are not carved, but grown, branches coaxed into spirals by centuries of careful pruning. Sunlight ladders down through leaf-cut windows. Someone laughs around the corner, a steady, warm sound, and you let it wash over you like a favorite radio station in a quiet kitchen. It's easy to imagine the gods here not as thunderbolts and declarations, but as neighbors with very complicated schedules. Council at dawn, contest at noon, long walk at dusk to think about the multiverse. You pass a basin sunk into the floor where water sits in a perfect lens. When you lean over it, your face swims beside a slice of sky. The water remembers the 3 wells you visited, the chalk of Erdr's rim, the hush of Mimir's depth, the bite of Hervelgemer's mist. You cup your hands and sprinkle a little over your hair because it feels appropriate. The droplets make the eagle feathers smell faintly metallic for an instant, a tiny callback to the root cold, and then the scent warms again to sun and soft dust. There's a small garden tucked between halls, bordered by low woven wattles. You stoop to read rune tags tied to herbs, thyme, angelica, and yarrow. A bee fusses in a flower with the grumpy dedication of someone who skipped lunch. You remember that the mead of poetry was, in one telling, brewed from the blood of a very unlucky being and stored in magical vats, before turning into inspiration, cozy, and decide the garden is a friendlier source of creativity. Light joke 2, you consider asking if they sell sleep blend tea and whether the label warns of prophetic dreams and spontaneous alliteration. A pair of children streak past, laughing without echo, because even laughter here knows how to keep the peace. Their wooden swords click, and one calls something about bridge guard duty with the solemn pride of promotion. A dog trots behind them with the air of an off-duty sentinel. You lean on a rail and watch a goose patrol the edge of a reflecting pool like a feathered inspector general. The serenity has texture. It's not absence of action, but a choreography that spends energy where energy belongs. A carved panel near the pool shows two groups facing each other across a river, hands raised not in threat, but in bargain. You're looking at a memory of the Aesir-Vanir War that ended in truce, hostage exchange, and shared rule. Mainstream fact to steady you. The myths tell of an early conflict between the warrior-leaning Aesir and the fertility-wise Vanir, resolved in a blend that shaped the pantheon. Historians still argue whether this war reflects echoes of cultural contact in Scandinavia, a poetic device for reconciling different cults, or simply a story about how families become families by surviving disagreements. Your feet find a quieter path, one that hugs the outer edge where the view slips away into shining distance. The rainbow arc of Bifrost pulses softly below, and you catch a glimpse of Midgard beyond it. Water shining like hammered tin, coastlines curling like cattails. You think of Ratatoskr dashing somewhere above, ferrying a brand new quip toward the eagle, and of Nidhogger grinding its old patient teeth below. The balance holds, not because anyone is still, but because everything moves with intention. Light joke 3 pads in. You consider submitting a maintenance ticket for minor cosmic creaking, then decide the system is working per design. As the sun leans warmer on the terrace, you notice shades spreading like a quilt, leaves arranging themselves to make you a seat. You sit. The bench knows your weight. Your breath settles into the slow, sensible rhythm Asgard prefers when nothing is on fire. A bell rings somewhere, one long note that says the day is turning its page, and you stand, smoothing your sleeve out of habit. The path ahead curls back toward the trunk, past a small arch set with embedded stones that glitter like night caught in honey. Beyond that arch lies the human world's edge, where surf speaks in giant syllables and a serpent turns in its sleep. You touch the eagle feather at your belt, the bridge under your feet, the bark at your shoulder, and feel them agree. The tree nudges, gentle as a friend's elbow, and you take the hint. You've basked enough. Time to keep strolling. The next realm won't visit itself. You step through the small arch, and the light shifts from honey to pewter, that soft silver that happens when sky and sea start having a quiet conversation. The path narrows along the outer rind of the trunk, and there it is below you, at last, the human circle, Midgard, cupped in the tree's vast hand like a blue bead on a string. You feel the air cool with the whiff of brine, kelp, and the clean bite of wind that has crossed 1,000 unbroken miles. Your pulse naturally matches the tide's slow in and out, as if the shoreline is practicing breathing with you. The bark at your shoulder roughens, grooves deepening like anchor ropes pressed into wood. You look down and see a seam where the tree's living edge meets a halo of atmosphere. Tiny storm cells wander like white cattle. Far out, a darker current bulges the water into a long shadow that coils, relaxes, coils again. You know that motion without needing a guidebook. Jormungandr, the world-serpent, asleep but not, ringed around Midgard with that contented, I fit perfectly energy of a cat in a too small box. Your fingers tighten on the railing made of grown branches, respectful of scale. A wave flattens itself politely against a rocky coast, and the sound climbs all the way up to you. Foam hissing, gulls muttering, rigging knocking against masts in some snug harbor where a person ties a knot by habit more than intention. Mainstream fact to keep you grounded. The people who sailed these waters, whom we shorthand as Vikings, used clinker-built longships during the late 8th to 11th centuries, with overlapping planks riveted to flex and bite the waves, making fast coastal raids, but also long, steady trade voyages to places as far as Byzantium and Baghdad. You imagine one such hull now, gliding under your gaze, a stitched leaf skimming the blue. You kneel to the tree skin and feel a thrumming that isn't sap this time, but oars in unison. Your ear fills with small familiar noises, the squelch of tarred rope, a sneeze bitten back, the smile and a short curse when a knot behaves. A boy hums to keep rhythm, and someone laughs because he picked a song 2 beats too fast. You grin because rhythm problems are a pan-realm phenomenon. Light joke 1 taps the rail. You consider shouting, "Alexa, slower," at the sea, then decide the gulls would never let you live it down. Beyond the harbor, a shoal gleams like a wet seal, and beyond that, the long shadow coils once more. The tree's outer bark has sprouted a sort of balcony, and you step onto it as if moving along the outer wall of a lighthouse. The wind scrubs your thoughts smooth. Even worries seem to lose their edges up here. You lean out and the feather from the eagle flutters against your hip like a friendly reminder that someone still has eyes on the horizon. A flick of movement below interrupts the tide's hypnosis. A head like a dark island rises. A ridge as big as a hill lifts and sinks, and the serpent's back draws a slow underline beneath Midgard's rim. You sense, not here, its awareness, not hungry, not bothered, just supremely committed to its job of contain and cuddle the world. Historians still argue whether Jormungandr's encircling was imagined as literally biting its own tail at all times, Ouroboros style, or as an almost full coil, surfacing for dramatic timing during storms and godly fishing trips. Either way, the water remembers the ring. A faint gilded line arcs from somewhere inland to the seaward edge, and you realize you're seeing a myth mapped onto a habit. Roads meeting harbors, settlements choosing promontories with good sightlines, stone cairns placed like breadcrumb beacons. You recall a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found smoothing boards of whalebone in Norse age houses, early ironing tools used with a glass or stone slicker, proof that while sagas sang of heroes, somebody at home cared deeply about wrinkle management. You picture a winter evening, shirts steaming, someone telling a story about a serpent while pressing a tunic smooth, and your shoulders drop another notch. Yes, even legends live with laundry. Out past the bay, the water darkens to iron. A longship noses into the chop, sail reefed low, crew decking spray with that particular camaraderie that says, "We didn't think it would be this wet, but here we are." They angled toward a headland where a cairn stands, a shoulder-high stack of stones that has probably teased 100 fogs into thinking it's a person. Mainstream fact again. Runestones and guide stones sometimes served navigational and commemorative purposes. Some marked bridges or roads funded as pious works. Others remembered people by name, mapping grief onto land. You trace a groove in the bark and think how human hands like leaving names where wind can memorize them. A blade of sunlight slips between clouds, and for a heartbeat you see the serpent's eye below you, lidless, calm,
reflecting a sky that looks surprised to find itself so perfectly mirrored. Light joke 2 surfaces and splashes away. You consider rating the serpent 5 stars on world-wrapping service, would coil again. The wind edits you back to reverence. Something flits near your cheek, a bright glint, feather light, and lands on your palm. A crystal splinter, clear as frozen water. It hums when you tilt it, throwing the horizon into double. You've heard of objects like this, though their reality is a long debate cozying up to a campfire. Historians still argue whether sunstones, possibly Iceland's spar, were ever used by Norse navigators to find the sun's angle through cloud or twilight by detecting polarized light. No manual survives to show you the move, but the crystal's trickery delights your inner magpie. You tuck it into the same belt loop as the eagle feather, a small constellation of helpful shinies. The branch path bends along a cliff face of bark where lichens write soft graffiti. You read the patterns like a slow script: patience, tack left, mind the swell. Below, waves lift into orderly ranks and then fall apart on submerged rock with the satisfied hiss of soda poured just right. Your breath has lengthened without permission. Midgard's edge edits sentences into longer lines. You glance toward the far horizon where cloud and sea shake hands, and for a moment you feel the entire planet roll under your feet like a colossal, friendly wheel. You think of people who watched this same water from colder coasts, farmers with boats, traders with stories, poets with the enviable ability to nap on benches between verses. Mainstream fact to anchor the image: Norse travelers reached as far west as Vinland, in modern Newfoundland, around the year 1000, evidenced by the remains at Ants Bow Meadows. The thought that a longship crossed that much gray, patient water, and then someone tried to make bread in a turf house, makes you love human persistence even more than you already did. The tree seems to rumble a soft agreement. Somewhere beneath the waves, the serpent turns in sleep. The coil brushes a volcanic vent. A ribbon of warmer water rises like a sigh. You inhale and taste iron, salt, and something old enough to be birth. The ribbon threads toward a cape where a village's smoke thins into evening. A dog barks, a door thumps. You could swear you hear a lullaby if you hold very still. Light joke 3 pads in shyly. You wonder if the serpent counts boats instead of sheep. The air cools further, and your path leans northward along the tree's circumference. The wind sharpens with a clean, minty bite. Your ears pink, your hands find your sleeves. Below, ice clinks along a pebble beach like thousands of tiny bells learning their scales. You glance back once, the arc of Bifrost faint in the corner of your eye, Asgard's gold a memory on your cheekbones, and then forward towards a paler sky. Frost breath clouds the bark, sketching ferny patterns that melt when you touch them. You reach a lookout grown from the trunk, 3 ribs of wood curving out like the prow of a ship, and lean into it. The world-serpent slides away beneath a froth of blown snow, the sea hardening into mirror where it can. Above that white edge, mountains lift blue as bruises. You close your eyes and let the cold clean you. Somewhere a squirrel scolds the weather for being dramatic, and you smile. The tree hums its everything okay question, and your bones answer yes. North of here waits a land where laughter is the sound of ice cracking and then not cracking, where halls are lit by foxfire and jokes are told with gloved hands. You wind the feather's quill through your belt a little tighter, press the sunstone shard against your palm until it warms, and set your steps toward the chill that giants call home. The bark under your fingers grows glassy.
Your breath grows visible and friendly. The path narrows to a clean white line that leads you on, steady as a promise.
Cold slips under your collar the way a cat slips under a fence, decisive, expert, faintly amused at your layers. The bark path tightens to a pale ribbon and then widens again, the grain whitening as if the tree itself exhales frost here. You lean forward, palms on wood cool as glass, and peer into a distance that has the color of steel held under running water. This is Jotunheim, the land of the Jotnar, translated as giants often enough that the word has stretched like a sweater. Though you learn quickly that size is a mood here, not a measurement. Cliffs loom like sleeping cattle. Pines huddle with their shoulders up. In the far valley, a hall squats low and long, roof loaded with snow like a politely quiet guest. Your breath writes little stories in front of you, each exhale a pale sentence that dissolves before it can be edited. You follow the path down a shoulder of bark where icicles hang like dagger teeth, but they drip soft, each drop a tiny metronome. Somewhere below, laughter rumbles, not thunderous, more like two boulders discussing soup. You smile into your scarf. Light joke one pads out. You privately rehearse your, "Hi, I'm normal-sized. Please don't put me in your pocket," speech. The first sign of company is not footprints, but the way the snow has been asked to behave. It's tamped into a path wide enough for sleds and egos, bordered by spruce boughs pinned with bone toggles. A rack of skis leans against the outer wall of that long hall, leather bindings stiff with cold, poles capped with rings for float. Mainstream fact anchors you. Medieval Norse sources mention skiing as practical winter travel and hunting, and the goddess Skadi is famously depicted with skis and bow, a winter patron who wears mountain weather like a well-fitted coat. You brush a bit of frost from a binding and feel absurdly fond of whoever last tightened this knot. A Jotun appears with the startling softness of a whale surfacing. He is tall, yes, but your eyes keep insisting on his hands, big-knuckled, careful, holding a kettle as if the kettle has opinions. He nods to you the way neighbors nod on stairwells. No booming introduction, no staged menace, just a host with practical heat. He gestures you inside with the kettled steam, and you duck through a doorway framed by antlers old enough to have forgotten who wore them. Inside is dusk with candles, walls of fitted timber, rafters beamed with driftwood bleached to pearl, benches furred with reindeer hides that sigh when you sit. The floor smells like pine smoke braided with something resin sweet. Bowls line a shelf, each has a notch cut in the rim, a small claim mark in the language of knives. A low table holds chest-like pieces carved from antler and ice. Ships, bears, a tiny hammer, a crooked smile you're not sure how to move. The Jotun's kettle complains happily as he hangs it on a hook over coals that glow the way embers glow when everyone has told their biggest story and switched to the small ones that really matter. He watches you with an expression you recognize from good teachers and very patient bartenders. You thank him for the warmth, and something in his posture says, "Of course, weather is a shared animal." He pours something like broth into a mug the size of an optimistic flower pot. It tastes of juniper and bone and the kind of patience that needs salt. Historians still argue whether the Jotnar were conceived as hostile others, kin rivals, or embodiments of natural forces, frost, mountain, night, that the gods must negotiate rather than conquer, and the steam rising from your mug votes for negotiation. On the wall, a textile glows like a winter sunrise, red, gold, black,
woven with bold diamonds and trees whose branches climb into stylized birds. A quirky tidbit loosens from memory. In parts of Scandinavia, bright woven bands, bric-a-vev tablet weaving, decorated clothing and horse gear, and some grave finds preserve tablets themselves, little square looms that fit in a hand. You picture a Jotun hand working a tiny loom with improbable gentleness, and the image fits far better than you expect. Conversation arrives the way snow arrives, incrementally, then all at once. The Jotun tells you, with gestures and a cadence your ear falls into, about ice singing on the river when it's first locked, about foxes leaving signatures shaped like punctuation, about how soup tastes different when the moon is in the doorway. You trade him your best weather story from Midgard's Edge, which is mostly about a longship and a sunstone that hummed when you tilted it. He nods at the mention of the crystal. The crease at his eyes says the trick is old here too. More folk drift in, a woman with a scarf patterned like frost ferns, a man with a beard full of wood shavings, a child with a stick he uses to poke the fire with a level of professional seriousness. The woman's scarf holds your eye. The fern shapes are so precisely hooked that they look grown rather than woven. She takes your interest as invitation and shows you the back of the work. The knots neat enough to pass inspections by moss auditors. Light joke 2 sizzles in. You almost ask whether Ratatoskr grades textiles or just gossip, but you keep the squirrel name to yourself. No need to import drama into a perfectly calm room. Someone sets out a board game scratched into the tabletop, little stones in 2 colors. The rules seem to involve surrounding things until the surrounded thing agrees it is surrounded, a useful metaphor in any realm. You play badly, which delights your opponents because your learning curve makes their evening longer. The Jotun with the kettle offers you dried fish and something like cloudberry jam, and somehow the pairing tastes like a story about summer smuggled into winter's pocket. On a shelf sit objects that could be tools or charms. A bone needle big enough to suture a sail, a comb carved with interlaced wolves, a little wooden disc with notches around its edge. The disc draws your fingers. The Jotun taps it and mimes counting stars. You realize it's a memory aid, perhaps for nights when constellations debate where to stand. Mainstream fact drifts in to steady you. Norse skaldic poetry uses complex kennings, 2-part metaphors like whale road for sea, requiring memory palaces of sound and image. Such devices, whether carved or carried in the mind, were routes through winter's long narratives. You roll the disc between your fingers, filing the tactile sensation in your own memory palace under things that feel like responsibility and play. Historians still argue whether the Jotnar were conceived as hostile others, kin rivals, or embodiments of natural forces, frost, mountain, night, that the gods must negotiate rather than conquer. And the steam rising from your mug votes for negotiation. On the wall, a textile glows like a winter sunrise, red, gold, black, woven with bold diamonds and trees whose branches climb into stylized birds. A quirky tidbit loosens from memory. In parts of Scandinavia, bright woven bands, bric-a-vev tablet weaving, decorated clothing and horse gear, and some grave finds preserve tablets themselves, little square looms that fit in a hand. You picture a Jotun hand working a tiny loom with improbable gentleness, and the image fits far better than you expect. Conversation arrives the way snow arrives, incrementally, then all at once. The Jotun tells you, with gestures and a cadence your ear falls into, about ice singing on the river when it's first locked, about foxes leaving signatures shaped like punctuation, about how soup tastes different
when the moon is in the doorway. You trade him your best weather story from Midgard's Edge, which is mostly about a longship and a sunstone that hummed when you tilted it. He nods at the mention of the crystal. The crease at his eyes says the trick is old here too. More folk drift in, a woman with a scarf patterned like frost ferns, a man with a beard full of wood shavings, a child with a stick he uses to poke the fire with a level of professional seriousness. The woman's scarf holds your eye. The fern shapes are so precisely hooked that they look grown rather than woven. She takes your interest as invitation and shows you the back of the work. The knots neat enough to pass inspections by moss auditors. Light joke 2 sizzles in. You almost ask whether Ratatoskr grades textiles or just gossip, but you keep the squirrel name to yourself. No need to import drama into a perfectly calm room. Someone sets out a board game scratched into the tabletop, little stones in 2 colors. The rules seem to involve surrounding things until the surrounded thing agrees it is surrounded. A useful metaphor in any realm. You play badly, which delights your opponents because your learning curve makes their evening longer. The Jotun with the kettle offers you dried fish and something like cloudberry jam, and somehow the pairing tastes like a story about summer smuggled into winter's pocket. On a shelf sit objects that could be tools or charms. A bone needle big enough to suture a sail, a comb carved with interlaced wolves, a little wooden disc with notches around its edge. The disc draws your fingers. The Jotun taps it and mimes counting stars. You realize it's a memory aid, perhaps for nights when constellations debate where to stand. Mainstream fact drifts in to steady you. Norse skaldic poetry uses complex kennings, 2-part metaphors like whale rope.
The bark softens underfoot, the frost unwinds from your sleeves, and the air smells newly washed, like rain has just been folded and put away. The path opens into a green-lit colonnade where leaves are cut into long feathers, and the sound that reaches you first is not speech, but water learning its curve, eddies practicing their signatures, cattails whispering gossip at knee height that even Ratatoskr would find too mellow to carry. You follow the grain toward a low, shining braid of rivers, each a different green: willow green, barley green, the pale green of sun through apple skin. Canoes carved from single trunks nap against a bank grown from the tree itself, and a rope lies in coils so tidy a moss auditor would stamp it approved without comments. You kneel to rinse your hands. The water drinks the light and gives it back in little coins. A figure in a boat raises a palm in greeting, not grand, more like the nod bakers give each other at dawn. You step into the canoe, which has the honest stability of a good promise, and the current takes you with the sort of competence that makes engines jealous. Reed warblers knit and unknit songs in the margins. Dragonflies stitch blue thread between lily pads. The world slows to the river's chosen tempo, and you find your shoulders drop to match it. The banks are stitched with gardens that look wild until you notice the intention. Raised beds edged with woven wattle, fruit trees pruned to flatter the sun, a line of beehives tucked under an awning clouded by contented traffic. A woman in a linen dress stands hip-deep in the shallows, washing a basket of herbs. She tips her chin toward you with the frankness of someone who has already outlived this afternoon twice. You recognize the mood of the place before its name. Vanaheim, the realm of the Vanir, those gods whose vocabulary includes tide, seed, wealth, and the quiet mathematics of reciprocity. A fairy pole taps your shoulder, soft, asking permission to be used, and you stand, set the pole, and push. The canoe slides along with a sigh as pleasant as a cat's last blink before sleep. Mainstream fact to anchor you: the myths remember a war between Aesir and Vanir, ended in truce and an exchange of hostages. Njordur, Freyr, and, by some tellings, Freya, dwelling among the Aesir afterward, an arrangement that braided sea, fertility, and treasure lore into Asgard's politics, as recorded by Snorri and hinted by older verse. That exchange felt less like conquest and more like irrigation. A longhouse rises on the right bank, low and generous, with doors held open by antler hooks. Smoke threads from a vent in a line so neat you suspect it rehearsed. You ease the canoe into a berth that grew precisely for it, step onto a plank as springy as good bread, and breathe in a kitchen's worth of aromas: malt, honey, wet wool, a little peat. Someone is singing in a room you can't see, 3 notes forward, 1 back, like rowing, only with vowels. They meet you with hands smelling of grain and river, a person with their sleeves rolled, a person with salt in their hair, a child with ink stains on their thumb. They read your belt the way gardeners read weather: feather, sunstone, pocket heat from a giant's hearth. Oh, you've been outside? Welcome. They hand you a bowl that could be soup or sweet porridge, and either way your body decides it was starving for it. Light joke 1 stirs at the rim. You consider asking if there's a tasting flight of porridge, then realize your mouth has moved ahead to seconds without waiting for your brain to sign off. Along the hall's wall hang tools that look like instruments: sickles with blades like crescent moons, flails braided from rawhide that whisper when you swing them, distaffs whose carved heads might be birds or boats depending on the angle. One distaff bears little notches, tally marks that seem almost like a diary. A woman takes it down, plants it in a basket of flax, and draws the fibers out into thread with practiced ease. Twist, inhale, step, exhale. Historians still argue whether the Volue, wand carriers, seeresses, were closely tied to Vanir cult practice or broadly woven through many types of worship, moving between communities as keepers of ritual and song. Here, the distaff hums like both staff and spindle, prophecy and sweater waiting patiently on the needles of time. They lead you to the porch that faces the river bend. The longhouse eaves are trimmed with fish scales hammered from bronze. Sunlight pebbles across them so cheerfully you'd swear you hear a courtesy chime. A carved board sits on a knee-height stool, a game you don't recognize with pieces shaped like boats and sheaves. A boy with the ink-stained thumb is involved in a fierce match against an old woman whose laughter arrives just before her victories. They let you sit between them, and the boy explains rules that may or may not be entirely real, with the solemn mischief of someone inventing a tradition in front of your eyes. You lose elegantly, which the river approves with a gluck of contentment against the pilings. A quirky tidbit floats into the gentle current of talk. In some Nordic regions, rents and tithes were paid not in coin, but in butter, wool, or fish, a butter tax that could stack into shining yellow bricks of obligation. You picture an accountant with a very sticky ledger and a cheese knife kept for audits, and promise yourself you'll never again underestimate how portable wealth can smell like toast. The Vanir here know that storage is a spell, and that generosity returns like migratory birds if you keep the paths clear. Someone mentions Njordur in the way you mention a wind you're fond of. Head tilted, smile tucked in the corner. The speaker's wrists are brine-streaked, and their hair keeps secrets in its salt. They tell you about a tide that breathes like a cow, 1-2, 1-2, reliable and tender. About a shoal that moves just to keep sailors humble. About a storm that tries not to knock because it knows everyone is already listening. Your canoe softens against the dock like it's also eavesdropping. Meanwhile, a girl smears honey on a piece of bread and, with great ceremony, offers the first bite to the river. A bee hovers with professional curiosity, making notes for the hive. Mainstream fact again, gentle as an oar dip. The 11th century chronicler Adam of Bremen described a great temple at Uppsala where sacrifices were made to a triad of gods:
one associated with war, likely Odin, one with fertility and peace, often linked to Freyr, and one with thunder, Thor. And while his outsider's account is debated, it suggests public ritual that tied harvest and human hope together. The Vanir are old friends to that type of hope, and you can feel it in the grain of the porch rail under your hand, smoothed by years of elbows measuring weather. A fisherman tips a bucket and shows you a heap of amber lumps, sunrise frozen mid-step. He calls it sea tears, then winks because poetry plays fine at market too. He pops a piece on the table, taps it with a knife, and the resin sings faintly. He carves a bead hole with quick twists and strings it beside a fishbone charm. The necklace looks like a small prayer that knows how to swim. Light joke 2 surfaces. You consider asking if there's a tasting flight of porridge, then realize your mouth has moved ahead to seconds without waiting for your brain to sign off. When you ask if the Vanir ever get bored, this much serenity must be a full-time job. The woman with the distaff grins and flicks a thread so fine it catches on sunlight. She tells you that stillness and patience are 2 different species. One grows moss, the other grows gardens. You let the distinction...
The canoe nose slides into shadow, the green-gold light of Vanaheim folding behind you like a page turned in a soft-spined book. The air thickens into something heavier, richer, part damp stone, part smoke from coals that have been banked for days but still remember the flare. You step ashore onto a shelf of bark, smoothed, flat, and dark, veined with seams that glitter, as if the trees swallowed a vein of stars and let them leak just enough to mark the way. Ahead, an arched opening yawns into the trunk, framed by roots that twist together so tightly they look braided on purpose. Somewhere deep inside, a hammer falls, then another. The sound is so regular it might be a heartbeat if hearts were made of iron. You duck into the passage, and the world narrows to torchlight. The flames are cupped in iron brackets shaped like curled leaves, their shadows fluttering across the walls as if the metal itself is impatient to be something else. The floor underfoot changes from bark to packed earth, then to stone, cool, dry, faintly humming with vibrations from below. Mainstream fact to ground you. In Norse myth, Alfheim, often translated as home of the Black Elves, is closely associated or even conflated with the realm of the dwarves, master smiths like Broker and Eitri, who forged treasures for the gods, Thor's hammer Mjolnir, Odin's spear Gungnir, Freyr's ship Skidbladnir. Historians still argue whether Black Elves and dwarves were originally distinct beings in the lore, or if the categories merged over time through oral tradition and poetic shorthand. The tunnel widens into a hall where the roof disappears into shadow, beams of light falling in vertical shafts from vents high above. Dust motes drift like patient sparks. Along the walls, workbenches sprout from the stone itself, their surfaces strewn with chisels, tongs, coils of fine chain that glimmer when you move. A dwarf stands at one of the benches, his shoulders square as a doorway, his beard tied back to keep it from courting the forge. He glances at you once, quick assessment, and then gestures you closer with a tilt of his hammer. It's an invitation, not a command. You sidle up to the workbench, where a half-finished torque rests, its twisted gold strands catching the torchlight. He picks it up and turns it in his hands with the care of someone turning a thought over in their mind. Without a word, he points to a stool. You sit, and he drops a small lump of metal into your palm, warm, heavier than it looks, with the dense promise of transformation. Light joke 1 murmurs in. You briefly consider telling him you've never been great at arts and crafts, but decide the metal deserves more respect than that. From the far side of the hall comes the hiss of water meeting hot iron, followed by a puff of steam that smells faintly of pine resin and something like cinnamon. You glance over and see another dwarf drawing a blade from the quench, its surface patterned with ripples like wind across shallow water. Quirky tidbit surfaces. Archaeological finds in Scandinavia have turned up pattern-welded swords whose watered steel looks almost alive. The technique, blending different types of iron and steel, was both art and necessity in an era before uniform metal. You imagine one of those swords telling stories to itself in the dark, just to keep its edge entertained. Your host sets aside the torque and picks up a set of tongs holding a small ingot. He moves to a forge where the coals glow white at the core, and every hammer strike that follows is a syllable in a language you can almost parse. Sharp vowels, steady consonants, no wasted words. He doesn't talk as he works, but you realize you're learning just from watching. How to angle a wrist so the blow draws the metal out evenly. How to read the colors in the heat. How to listen for the change in tone when the work hardens and needs rest.
The bridge rises, and each step feels like walking a bowstring drawn tighter and tighter. The shimmer above sharpens into a curtain, thin as a soap bubble, but stretched wide across the path. Light pools in its folds, sliding from silver to amber to deep crimson, as though it's borrowing colors from every realm below. You can hear it too, a faint whispering, not in words, but in the cadence of something reciting an ancient list over and over. When you pass through, the air shifts immediately. It's not warmer or colder, but heavier, as if time here is thick enough to brush against your skin. The ground beneath you isn't bark anymore. It's a weave of the cords themselves, braided so tightly they've become a single surface. Every step hums faintly, and each hum is different, a thousand-layered chorus of everything Yggdrasil holds together. Mainstream fact: in some interpretations of Norse myth, the idea of Ragnarök isn't a singular end, but part of an ongoing cycle, a death and rebirth that happens over and over. Historians still argue whether the myths were meant to be predictive prophecy or symbolic explanation for natural and social upheavals. Here, though, the distinction feels unimportant. The air tells you both are true. In the distance, the weave opens into a circular space, and at its center is a hollow, a deep, perfect circle in the chords, large enough to swallow an entire hall. Peering in, you see movement far below, roots twisting, branches swaying, fire meeting frost, waves folding over themselves. It's all of the realms at once, seen from a vantage point no single realm could ever offer. As you watch, the hum beneath your feet wavers. The chords shiver, not breaking, but flexing in a way that makes you instinctively adjust your stance. Then you see it, a line of shadow creeping along the weave, moving with patient inevitability. It doesn't devour the chords, it dims them, pulling their hum down a note. The shadow passes over one thread, and a gust sweeps through the branches far above. It touches another, and a faint ripple of heat stirs from the south. Light joke one surfaces uninvited. You imagine the tree sighing, "Here we go again," like a parent watching a toddler head for the paint cans. But the humor is brief. The shadow isn't a single thing you can point to. It's every strain, every quarrel, every gnaw at the roots made visible. Figures appear at the edge of the circle. Caretakers, guardians, even creatures from realms you visited. The eagle perches on a high arc of the weave. Ratatoskr darts in and out of view. And even the guardian from Helheim stands still, watching. They do not look afraid. They look aligned, as though they've all been here before. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars point out that in the surviving sources, many beings who are enemies in the myths still play necessary roles in keeping the cosmos balanced until its appointed unraveling. Enemies and allies are both threads, woven into the same fabric,
until the moment the loom is allowed to rest. One of the caretakers steps forward holding a coil of new cord. It gleams faintly, your color, the sum of all the small pieces you've gathered, the feather's lightness, the barley's golden grain, the elf coin's shimmer, the copper's warmth. Without asking, they pass it to you. The weight is almost nothing, but your hands close on it like you've been carrying it the whole time. They gesture toward a gap at the circle's edge, a place where the weave is fraying, not catastrophically, but enough to hum with instability. You kneel, press the cord's end into the living fiber, and feel it catch, drinking in the connection. Slowly, you work it into place, looping it around the old strands, pulling it snug. The hum steadies. Historians still argue whether the Norse saw themselves as participants in their myths or merely as inheritors of them. In this moment, with the hum in your hands, you think maybe there was never a difference. You tie off the last loop. The shadow pauses, not gone, but slowed. The caretakers nod. The eagle ruffles its feathers. Ratatoskr chitters something that might be approval or sarcasm. Light joke 2. You decide to take it as approval. The heavy air lightens. The cords beneath you loosen just enough to carry a softer hum. The hollow in the center still shows all the realms, still in motion, still imperfect, but now there's a glint of newness in their light. The caretakers begin to drift back to their posts. You turn to the bridge, feeling the familiar pull of gravity as you cross back into the heartwood. Behind you, the shimmer folds in on itself, like a curtain quietly closing between acts. You walk down into the trunk, each step slower, softer. The hum of the chords fades into the steady rhythm of the tree itself, a rhythm you now recognize in your own heartbeat. Light joke 3 rides on the breath you let out, and you mutter that you came for a bedtime story and ended up doing maintenance work. The bark seems to smile under your hand. And then you find yourself on a wide path, the same way you began. Only this time the weight on your belt is more than objects. It's the 9 realms themselves, carried with you as you step into the long, gentle winding.